Situation at the border. Let's try and get an insight into what those people have run away from. Just to remind you, of course, the Russian airstrikes backing Bashar al-Assad's troops who are closing in on the areas around Aleppo. We're joined now by Rami Jarrah, who is a journalist whose office in Aleppo was bombed this very morning by Russian jets. Rami was actually in Istanbul. He joins us from there. Rami, thank you for being with us. Can you tell us what the effect is of the Russian bombing campaign on Aleppo and on the surrounding area right now? Tell us what you've seen, tell us what you've heard.
First of all, thank you for having me. We have an escalation in central Aleppo of bombings. The attacks are up at around 25 airstrikes daily now on the centre of the city. And what this means is that the marketplaces and the main roads, squares, schools, most are now disabled. And this is forcing a lot of civilians to leave the city and head towards a neighbouring city called Idlib. This is a strategy by the government. They're trying to push the civilians out because a siege is underway in the north. And this is escalation that everyone's talking about. The Russian jets and Syrian jets, accompanied with ground troops, accompanied by Hezbollah, the Lebanese militia, are headed towards the Turkish border. And if they're able to accomplish this, what's going to happen is 300 to 500,000 people are going to fall under siege, which will be a catastrophe.
It's something that many people are warning about. You must have huge fears for friends, colleagues, family who are still there?
That's definitely the case. I don't think it's hard to explain this any further. The problem is that this has been a situation for the past 5 years where myself and many other people, and millions of people for that matter, have had friends and family in different locations in Syria. It just goes on from area to area. And now we're talking about a situation on a much larger scale, which is about 500,000 people who could be paying the price of ignorance and hesitation of the international community to actually commit to anything. And what we hear are constant talks of a need for a political solution when really there are no sides involved in looking for that solution. There are just civilians on the ground paying for this price of narrative that there is terrorism on the ground. And in fact, there are two terrorists, the Assad regime and ISIS, who both are trying to combat with civilians who have people trying to protect them in this area called Aleppo. And it's now being crushed. And what the problem is that how it's being conveyed as a siege. It's a siege being carried out by more than one party, and it's extremism and dictatorship, both ISIS and the regime. And it's not just being carried out by the Assad regime, it's totally being ignored. I know I went off path with my answer, I'm very sorry, but it's become very frustrating how we continue to have to explain what's happening in the country, and the international community is just quiet and watching this bloody throw-on keep going.
Rami, we're trying to give you time to speak, so take your time because we're interested in what you have to say, because this story needs to be told. So please don't feel that you need to rush. Take your time. You mentioned 25 airstrikes a day, and clearly the toll that is taking on civilians, well, we're not seeing up-to-date pictures, but one can only imagine. And clearly civilians are suffering. That is a factor of what is happening. In Munich, there's this meeting going on. Russia's called for a March the 1st ceasefire. What do you make about that? Why not call for an immediate ceasefire, as the US is?
First of all, I just want to say that you're right about no pictures coming out. This is because there's almost complete censorship. And I know that it's very frustrating for yourselves and many journalists and media outlets around the world that are trying to actually access the story and finding it impossible. It's really because there are no journalists left inside the country to report on what's going on. The meeting in Munich is, and this call for a ceasefire on the 1st of March, is really contradictory to the situation. Right now, what was required is an immediate ceasefire, one before this offensive takes place. And any negotiations, any peace talks that are happening during an offensive like this are totally void. This is why there are protests that are very spontaneous protests that have broken out inside the country recently. And it's very disturbing what they're saying in these protests. They're saying we have no one but God. They're against the coalition, the Syrian opposition coalition. They're against the Americans. They're against the French. They're against the Russians. They're against basically everybody because they see that there is no hope whatsoever from any party involved in this. And nobody supports these talks inside the country because each time any talks have been launched, All the people on the ground have seen is an escalation in military offensive on the ground. The government and the Russians used this momentum to attack. This is what they did in Geneva too. When the talks were taking place, Homs was attacked, was then surrounded, was then strangled into submission, and we saw what ended up happening in Homs. It's a destroyed city, but it's basically deserted now. The problem in Aleppo is that this is a much bigger scale operation, and this is why the Russians are leaving some timeline for them to commit to what's happening. And this is not just the Russians. We have Hezbollah militias, there are Afghani Shia militias, there's the PKK, there's ISIS, and the Syrian regime. All are attacking this one area. It's Aleppo. And it's just, I'm sorry to say this again, it's just ridiculous that this is being ignored. And that politically, the narrative that's being pushed is that we need a political solution.
Rami Jarrah, I'm afraid we need to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. And I hope, sir, that we will talk again very soon. Thank you very much for giving us your time. Thank you for sharing what you know about your town, your city, the situation there in Aleppo. Rami Jarrah, the journalist who his office was bombed in Aleppo by Russian jets this very morning. He joined us from Turkey by phone there to give us the latest. And of course, we'll try to get back to Rami at a later date to get more on what's happening there in Aleppo.